Welcome to this general introduction and summary of Popper's Of Clouds and Clocks. This essay is one, among others, published in Popper's collection of papers under the title of Objective Knowledge: An Evolutionary Approach. The presentation offers an overview of Popper's argument, but does not include the wealth of detail and contextual references that Popper offers in this paper. Reading the original paper will therefore prove informative and rewarding. The book is available in both hard and paperback from the usual online sellers. The overarching question of this essay of Popper's is that of how we can explain human freedom. The idea of freedom has been debated in philosophy down the years, and there is a problem that lies at the heart of this debate. We might be inclined to attribute freedom to non-human behaviours, for example the choice of location that the bird makes for her nest, or the preferences that a dog might show for a particular dog food. But this simple idea of freedom derived from the non-human world is primitive compared to that of human freedom. We seem to be the only species that places freedom of will at the centre of our sense of being, of who we are. As Jean-Paul Sartre suggested, we are what we freely make of ourselves, and in that process we have to make multiple choices throughout our conscious lives. But in a largely determinate world that runs on almost mechanical lines, and that lends itself to scientific study based largely on tracing causes and effects, how can we be so different? Are we just complicated machinery or computing systems, or are we genuinely free to act according to something called human will? To address these questions, Popper begins by postulating a world in which all things, all objects and processes, fall between two kinds of phenomena. On the one hand we have clouds, and on the other clocks. By clocks he's referring to a clockwork timepieces powered by a spring or weights and regulated by a pendulum. Clouds are, at least to normal human perception, irregular, disorderly and unpredictable. The process of moving, breaking up and conjoining does not seem to arise from any cause, and there is a looseness and flexibility in any particular cloud system. Properly maintained pendulum clocks, on the other hand, are precise in their movement, regular, orderly and predictable. Nothing happens within the mechanism that was not caused by a previous event. We can trace a pathway of causes and effects from the initial movement of the mainstream right through to that of the clock hands. Between clouds and clocks are ranged a variety of objects and events, some more cloud-like, others more clock-like. Popper gives the examples of a young puppy as more cloud-like and an older dog as more clock-like. Plants in general are more clock-like, non-human creatures range between the two. A cloud of gnats, while contained within a cluster, moves about in an unpredictable cloud-like way. A well-trained sheepdog, on the other hand, is closer to a clock, reliable, precise in movement, and so on. Where do humans stand in this system? We might be initially tempted to place ourselves in the middle, but sometimes in unruly crowds we may become a little more like a cloud, and in a well-disciplined regiment more like a clock. Depending on circumstances, we can be both orderly and disorderly, predictable and unpredictable. But if we look more closely at clouds, perhaps reaching into their molecular structure, into the variables within which they exist, maybe we could discern similar chains of cause and effect like those observed in the clock. Our view of clouds as indeterminate may be based on our ignorance of the subtle way in which a whole range of factors come together to make the cloud what it is. If clouds have a concealed order of causes and effects, perhaps everything else, while appearing disorderly and unpredictable, also contains order and precision, but we simply don't know it. The term that we use for a physical system that is ultimately ordered and predictable can be reduced to chains of cause and effect is physical determinism. Historically, science, since the age of the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, has been driven on an assumption of physical determinism. The opposite of determinism is indeterminism, the unruly and unpredictable. This realm is consigned by scientists to the regions of superstition, of the supernatural and of magic. Science seeks to explain the world in terms of its underlying springs and mechanisms. The inspiration for this comes from the early astronomers Copernicus and Kepler, followed by the mathematical genius of Isaac Newton. Newton saw the universe as a majestic clockwork. What was previously thought of as the powering force of God's will was now seen in a mindless algorithm, a powering force of reason that demanded total explanation. Indiscipline was not tolerated. Everything was driven to conformity, order and predictability. Disorder was the product of ignorance, order the product of rational understanding and of knowledge. But in 1892, the American philosopher C.S. Peirce drew the curtain back on this tidy, controlling preconception of the universe. He wrote, "One who is behind the scenes knows that the most refined comparisons of the masses and lengths, far surpassing the precision of all other measurements, fall behind the accuracy of bank accounts. And the determinations of physical constants are about on a par with an upholsterer's measurement of carpets and curtains." Peirce's main occupation was in geodetics, the science of measuring and representing the geometry, gravity and spatial orientation of the Earth. In this context, the Earth and its workings was not to be understood in terms even remotely regarded as clockwork. Even in precision clocks, there may be detected a looseness in the controlling system. Minute variations occur as time wears down the mechanism. At the most minute level, the level of quantum, we may find quite a different state of affairs in which everything is more like a cloud than the theoretical clock of determinism. There only needs one example, one exception in the physical world of an indeterminate relation, such as offered by quantum theory, as the philosophy or physical determinism is challenged. The person who is celebrated in Popper's paper, Arthur Holly Compton, the Nobel Prize-winning American physicist, wrote on human freedom, "The fundamental question of morality, a vital problem in religion, and the subject for active investigation is in science. Are human beings free agents? If the atoms of our bodies follow physical laws as immutable as the motions of plants, why try? What difference can human efforts, however great, make if all our decisions, all our actions are already predetermined by mechanical laws?" In relation to questions of human freedom, for Popper, physical determinism was a nightmare. But is indeterminism any better? If what we call free action is simply arbitrary, random and unpredicted, on the toss of a coin as it were, then that makes human freedom equally problematic to explain. There is a degree of determinacy in human behaviour. I would not say that falling in love determines that a couple might decide to get married. A decision to marry is not a cause, however regularly it might be followed by a wedding. There may be a degree of determinacy or better probability in it, but there is always some plasticity, some looseness between purposes and action, planning and acting on that plan, and promising and keeping that promise. There is always a degree of indeterminacy in human behaviours, but this does not explain the idea of freedom. While physical determinacy rules out freedom, indeterminacy makes it possible, but it does not explain it. To make a game of chess physically possible, I need chessmen, a board, 2 players and a set of rules. Rules are abstract phenomena. They may be written down in chess primers, but when two players come together to play, the rules are in place in their minds, something that they know, perhaps long before they set the chessboard up. These rules determine what we do, physically, that is, with the pieces. Purposes, deliberations, plans, theories, intentions, values and promises are, among other things, abstract features of the reality that, like the rules of chess, result in changes to the physical reality of the world. But how does this work? What is happening as I deliberate on or promise to do something and then act? Popper argues that we can make no sense of these explanations in human behaviour without the assumption that we can envisage or imagine the future and are free to act according to the alternatives which we conceive as possibilities. We anticipate alternative courses of action and we imagine ourselves as the actors. We think ahead to possible outcomes, a kind of theorising or hypothesising process. We make considered guesses as to what might be happening and we act accordingly. We deliberate and explain our deliberations. We make clear our intentions and plans and we act. At each stage of the process we are making decisions. The arena for this kind of activity is language. Giving promises, offering reasons, stating intentions and communicating our plans are all language-based activities. We could be formulating promises and reasons, etc. privately. We don't have to make them explicit. But the very act of private formulation is dependent on knowing what reasons, promises, etc. are. These are publicly shared concepts learned in our youth as we are inducted into human language. Language, Popper tells us, has two levels of functioning. The lower level, the function of language, is in describing states of affairs and expressing our feelings. These lower functions are something that we have in common with non-human species. Animals and insects may employ simple sign systems to convey information and report on their own emotional state of affairs. Where language is distinct for human is in what Popper refers to as the higher functions, those of argumentation, critical discussion and invitations to choose. Our understandings are fluid depending on our engagement with others in argument and in discussion, and we each give each other alternatives in explanation from which they might choose. However much others might sometimes wish it, we are not locked into our plans, intentions and promises. Formal agreement in the shape of contracts and legally binding documents constructed under oath might lead us to think otherwise. But even here we are free to break our word and no doubt face the consequences. Intentions, plans and promises are not causal factors in subsequent action. There is a plasticity in the relation between our thought, declarations and actions, and we're always free to simply change our minds. Popper's argument in favour of human freedom lies in the connection between the ideas of planning, intentions and promises, etc., and the changes that we make in the world when we carry them out. Without freedom of choice, plans, intentions and promises would not make sense. They're expressions of human will and issuing actions in accordance with that will. Physical determinacy sees these ideas that translate into action as not making sense. We're simply going through the motions as if we were free, but in reality everything that we do could be reduced to determining factors. Physical determinacy would make plans, intentions and promises meaningless. Has Popper explained human freedom? He has shown how so much of our understanding of ourselves in human relations, in moral, religious and also scientific understanding, assumes that we are free. The notion of human freedom is networked into these concepts of planning, discussing, explaining, etc. The hard-line physical determinist might argue that all these are fictions, that these processes are distorted representations of what is going on behind the scenes. In this respect, the determinist becomes a bit like the conspiracy theorist. Every turn of the argument draws a determinist response, and the determinist presents his arguments as irrefutable. The view of science, however, particularly with reference to quantum theory, shows that physical indeterminism is a false picture of how things work. And this underlying feature of reality allows, in case of inquiry and disputation, the possibility of choice. Towards the final sections of the essay on clouds and clocks, Popper introduces the notion of exosomatic evolution. Animal evolution advances as the most fitted members of the species survive the challenges of the environment. Whatever features help them, sharp claws, good fur, coats, etc., maybe the facility to dig themselves into safe places. Given these gifts of birth, they are most successful in being able to reproduce their kind, and so the physical or somatic features of that breeding gave them are passed on and amplified through subsequent breeding cycles. This is somatic evolution, that is, relating to the body rather than the mind. But mental activity also plays a part in evolution. The tendency to use a stick to dig termites out of holes might substitute for the long tongue that can reach in there. The adoption of tools to do the work of bodies, Popper refers to as exosomatic evolution, and human beings are prime representatives of this process. Instead of waiting for nature to weed out humans on the basis of physical factors, we learned to make fires, to steal the pelts of animals, to create weapons, flint knives, and so on to secure our food or protect ourselves from animals. The manufacture of tools gave us an immense survival advantage. Among those early exosomatic exercises, human beings also evolved ideas, sometimes expressive, such as the early cave paintings, which might have been designed to excite people to acts of courage or to develop great hunting skills. The triumph of exosomatic evolution is the emergence of the hypothesis, of a theory. Theories involve us in envisaging future events and ways to deal with them. Instead of having to wait and see, and in the process risking our lives, we can now make conjectures, theorise and test out those theories. In this way our theories die in our stead, writes Popper. Popper's view of science, as well as abstract, is also functional. We're designing tools at the practical level, better knives, better weapons, better forms of housing, better maps, tools to measure with, and so on. But our theories, are like our tools, are being formed to perform a function, to offer useful explanations. Thus, the success of a theory is not discussed in terms of truth or falsehood. Certainly theories can be falsified, but the prime purpose is to find theories that have utility, that explain in a way that relates that which we learn from the environment with our practical and intellectual needs. This then has been our presentation on Popper's essay. This is not a substitute for reading the essay. There is much more in the paper than can be discussed here, but these are the bare bones of Popper's position, and hopefully this presentation will make the essay itself more accessible. Thanks for listening.